The gate had been finished for 21 days when 3 power company trucks rolled into Cedar Ridge before sunrise. Karen Whitmore stepped into the lane, one hand on the keypad, and told the crew nobody entered her private community without HOA authorization. Marcus Reed unfolded a utility map across the hood of his truck, checked one red line, then looked at the iron gate blocking it. Karen kept talking. Marcus did not. He pointed to the hinges and gave his crew a single order. Then the cutting tools came out. If stories about ordinary homeowners, quiet neighborhoods, and rules that suddenly stop being ordinary are your kind of thing, subscribe and tell us where you are watching from. Because to understand why a utility crew was standing beside a brand new gate with cutting equipment, you have to go back 4 months, to when Cedar Ridge still looked exactly the way Ethan Cole liked it. Ethan had lived there for 11 years. He was not the resident who quoted bylaws at meetings, challenged landscaping budgets, or filled neighborhood forums with complaints. He worked, kept his yard clean, waved at people walking dogs, and preferred to solve problems before they became arguments. The house mattered to him because it was the first place he had bought without anyone else's help. He had replaced the back deck himself, planted 2 maples along the side yard, and learned which section of fence rattled whenever the wind came hard from the west. Behind that fence ran a narrow strip of grass that most residents barely noticed. It was not a road exactly, but utility trucks had used it often enough that 2 shallow tire tracks appeared every summer. A green transformer box sat near the corner. Farther down, a faded metal marker warned against digging. Ethan's closing survey showed a utility easement crossing the same strip, a thin line with language he had read once at the kitchen table and then forgotten. It had never mattered because nobody had tried to build on it. That changed when Karen Whitmore became HOA president. Karen's first major project was introduced as a beautification and security upgrade. Her presentation showed stone columns, ornamental steel fencing, new landscaping, low-voltage lighting, and an automated gate separating Cedar Ridge from the service lane along the rear boundary. She called it a visual transformation. The management company's newsletter called it an investment in property values. Karen preferred another phrase, controlled access. At the spring meeting, she stood beside a rendering of the finished entrance and described how the gate would make the neighborhood feel more exclusive without changing daily life for residents. Delivery drivers could call in. Contractors could receive temporary codes. HOA vendors would be registered. The board estimated the project at $68,400, including electrical work, masonry, fabrication, and landscaping. Several homeowners winced at the number, but others nodded when Karen said comparable communities had already made similar upgrades. Ethan said almost nothing. He was studying the rendering. The decorative columns had been drawn directly where utility trucks normally crossed the grass. The gate itself appeared to span the same narrow lane that led toward the transformer and overhead equipment farther behind the homes. He looked again, then pulled up a photograph on his phone from the previous winter. In the background, partly hidden by weeds, was the old utility marker. After the presentation, Ethan waited until most residents had left. He approached the folding table where Karen was collecting papers and asked a simple question. Did the power company review the easement before this was designed? Karen barely glanced up. The project has already been approved. Ethan waited for more. None came. Approved by the utility? Karen stacked the remaining packets, squared the edges against the table, and gave him the same calm smile she used during board votes. Approved, she repeated. That answer should have closed the conversation. Instead, it opened the first question Ethan could not ignore. On the walk home, he passed the strip again. Survey paint from an earlier utility visit was still visible near the curb, and one orange flag stood less than 6 feet from the proposed column location. Nothing about it looked dramatic. That was what bothered him. The easement was not a rumor or an obscure rule buried in 100 pages of HOA policy. It was marked on the ground. If the board had checked, someone should have seen it. If someone had seen it, then Karen's answer meant something different. The next evening, Ethan pulled a cardboard file box from the top shelf of his office closet. Inside were the documents from his closing: title papers, inspection reports, a copy of the subdivision plat, and the survey he had barely looked at in years. He spread everything across the dining table and found the line within minutes. Utility easement, 15 FT. It ran along the rear boundary, crossed the grassy service strip, and continued directly through the area shown on Karen's rendering. The language in the deed was less dramatic than the capital letters on the survey, but the meaning was clear enough. The utility retained the right to enter that portion of the property for inspection, maintenance, repair, replacement, and access to its facilities. Ethan did not suddenly become an easement expert. He did not need to. The drawing told him what he needed to know. The HOA planned to place a permanent gate across a route someone else already had a recorded right to use. He scanned the relevant pages, saved them in a folder, and wrote an email to the management company and the board. It was short. Before construction begins, can you confirm whether the electric utility reviewed and approved the proposed gate and columns within the recorded utility easement? Karen replied the next morning at 8:14. She wrote that the area was part of HOA-controlled common property, that the board had authority to improve common areas, and that the contractor was proceeding under an approved site plan. She added that the project had been discussed in open meetings and approved by board vote. Ethan read the message twice. It answered 4 questions he had not asked. It did not answer the one he had. He replied with one sentence. Which utility representative approved the obstruction within the easement? No answer came that day. 2 days later, the management company sent a PDF labeled Final Site Plan. Ethan opened it expecting to find a utility stamp, a coordination note, or at least the name of someone from the power company. Instead, he found the landscape architect's title block, the contractor's revision date, the HOA's approval notation, and a general note instructing crews to verify underground conditions before excavation. Ethan zoomed in on the rear boundary. The easement line was faint but visible beneath the new construction symbols. One masonry pier sat almost on top of it. The gate swung across the access lane. The plan had not erased the easement. It had simply drawn a project over it. He stopped asking Karen to explain what she meant by approved. He started preserving what had actually been said. He downloaded the meeting notices. He saved Karen's email as a PDF with the timestamp visible. He kept the site plan in its original file format and printed a copy. He photographed the utility marker behind his fence with the date metadata intact. It felt like keeping a clean record in case somebody later claimed a conversation had gone differently. A week after his first email, Karen finally addressed him after another HOA meeting. She sounded irritated now. Ethan, this has been reviewed. You're creating confusion over a project the board has already authorized. Reviewed by the power company? By the professionals involved. Which power company professional? Karen's expression tightened. You are not entitled to manage the board's contractors. I didn't ask to. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan held up the printed plan. Can you show me the utility approval on this? Karen looked at the page but did not take it. The permits are in order. Again, a different answer. Ethan went home and placed the exchange beside the documents he had already saved. By then, he was no longer trying to prove Karen wrong. He was trying to determine whether anyone outside the HOA had ever been asked. The answer was hiding in plain sight. The plan Karen called approved contained no utility signature, no utility stamp, no utility review number, and no note authorizing a gate across the easement. For the first time, Ethan considered the possibility that the missing approval was not an oversight in the file. It might never have existed. At the next board meeting, Karen moved the gate project to the front of the agenda. She did it before homeowner comments. The room was half full, mostly residents who had come to ask about landscaping, pool hours, and the special assessment already added to their statements. Karen summarized the project in less than 3 minutes. She said the contractor had completed site verification, the plan met community standards, and delaying work would expose the HOA to change orders. Then Ethan raised his hand. Karen looked at him for several seconds before recognizing him. He asked whether the utility had approved construction within the recorded easement. Karen did not answer directly. Instead, she told the room that one homeowner had been circulating concerns about a project already reviewed by qualified professionals. She warned that repeated interference could increase costs for everyone. The framing worked. A man near the back asked why one resident was trying to stop a security improvement after everyone had already paid for it. Another homeowner said the existing service lane looked unfinished, and the new fence would finally make the rear entrance match the rest of Cedar Ridge. Ethan did not argue with them. He placed a copy of his survey on the sign-in table and asked that it be included with the meeting record. Derek Hayes, the HOA treasurer, leaned over to look at it. Derek was not close to Karen, but he had supported the project because the numbers had seemed controlled. The approved budget showed $22,800 for masonry and foundations, $19,600 for custom steel fabrication, $11,900 for automation and electrical work, and the rest for landscaping, design, and contingency. Derek tapped the easement notation with a pen. Did the permit reviewer flag this? Karen answered before the property manager could. All required permits are being handled by the contractor. It was enough for the board. The motion to proceed passed 4-1. 3 mornings later, excavation equipment arrived. Ethan watched from his side yard as workers marked the rear lane, stretched string lines, and began digging square footings for the masonry columns. One of the marks sat almost exactly where the faded utility flag had been. Before the concrete truck arrived, Ethan walked outside and photographed the site from public and HOA common areas. He captured the orange utility marker, the trench, the formwork, and the distance between the proposed column and the green transformer box. A site supervisor named Luis noticed him. "You with the association?" Luis asked. "Homeowner." Luis nodded toward Ethan's phone. "They changed something?" "I'm trying to understand whether the power company signed off on this location." Luis looked at the plan clipped to a board. "We build what's on the approved set. Does your set show the easement?" Luis scanned the sheet then shrugged. "Utility locating is for digging. Easement coordination isn't in our contract unless the owner gives us a restriction." That sentence mattered. Not because it proved the contractor had done anything wrong, but because it separated two things Karen kept blending together: safe excavation and legal access. Ethan thanked him and walked home. By late afternoon, rebar cages stood in the holes. The next day, concrete filled them. 2 days after that, crews began setting block for the decorative columns. The project was becoming harder to undo by the hour. Karen saw Ethan taking another photograph and approached him. "Stop interfering with the contractors. I'm documenting the work. You've made your position clear. So has the survey." Karen's expression tightened, but she walked away without answering him directly. Within 10 days, the two masonry columns were high enough to cast shadows across the lane. Steel mounting plates had been embedded in the concrete. Conduit emerged from one footing for the gate motor and keypad. The old orange flag was gone beneath fresh soil and mulch. But Ethan had photographed it before it disappeared. He saved that image with the rest of the file. By the end of the week, the board newsletter celebrated visible progress and announced that custom steel installation would begin soon. The rendering showed the gate closed. Behind it, barely visible, was the same service path utility trucks had used for years. Now it had 2 stone columns standing across it. Ethan waited until the masonry crew left before calling the electric utility. He did not begin with accusations. He gave the service address, explained that a gate was being constructed across a recorded easement, and asked whether the company still used that access route. The customer service representative transferred him twice. The third person was Olivia Grant, a property rights specialist who worked with easements, access conflicts, and utility real estate records. She asked for Ethan's parcel number, the subdivision name, and the approximate location of the proposed gate. There was a pause while she searched. "Yes," Olivia said. "That easement is active." Ethan looked at the survey on his desk. "Has the HOA received approval to put a permanent gate across it?" Another pause. "I don't see an access agreement modification, gate agreement, or recorded release. Does that mean they can't build it?" "It means I can't find anything in our records approving what you're describing." That answer was careful. Ethan noticed the difference. Olivia asked him to email the site plan and photographs. He sent them that afternoon. The next morning, she replied with a reference number and a short written statement confirming that the utility retained access rights through the easement and that no approval for the proposed obstruction appeared in the records she had reviewed. She also explained something Karen's emails had ignored. A gate that opened for residents was not automatically useful to a utility crew. Access had to work for bucket trucks, service vehicles, equipment trailers, emergency crews, and contractors who might arrive at times when no HOA board member was standing nearby with a remote. A keypad could be part of an acceptable arrangement in some circumstances, Olivia wrote, but only if the utility reviewed and accepted the configuration. Cedar Ridge had no such agreement on file. Ethan forwarded Olivia's email to the entire board. He attached the survey, the site plan, and photographs showing the columns already under construction. His message contained no threat. "Please pause permanent installation until the utility confirms the proposed access arrangement." Derek replied first. "Karen, can we verify this before final fabrication?" Karen responded 23 minutes later. "The gate does not eliminate access. It includes a keypad and manual override. The association will provide entry credentials as needed." There is no reason to halt a properly permitted project based on one homeowner's interpretation. Ethan read the sentence again. One homeowner's interpretation. He forwarded Olivia's message back to the thread and highlighted only the reference number. Derek asked whether the board had ever sent the plan to the utility before construction. No one answered. That evening, Karen called Ethan directly. She said the project was too far advanced to stop without financial penalties. The steel had been fabricated. Deposits were non-refundable. Landscaping work had been scheduled. She said the board had a duty to protect association funds from unnecessary change orders. Ethan listened. Then he asked, Wouldn't finishing it create a bigger change order if they make you move it? Karen exhaled. They are not going to make us move a gate they can open. You have that in writing? The board is handling it. From the utility? Silence. Karen ended the call by saying further questions should go through management. Ethan made a note of the date and time. 2 days later, a flatbed truck arrived, carrying the custom steel panels. The gate was heavier than Ethan expected. Black powder-coated bars rose between decorative crosspieces, each panel reinforced around the motor arms. Workers set the first section against the stone column and checked its clearance over the pavement. From his driveway, Ethan could see the green utility transformer beyond it. That image reduced the entire dispute to something almost absurdly simple. The equipment the utility needed to reach was visible. The structure blocking the route to it was being installed, and the utility had already said, in writing, that it had never approved the obstruction. At 4:37 that afternoon, the contractor's project manager received a short email from the HOA. Proceed with installation as scheduled. Ethan learned about it later through the board records. Karen had been warned. The board had the reference number. The gate went up anyway. What began as a questionable design choice had now become a documented decision made after the warning arrived. The finished gate looked expensive because it was. The steel panels alone took 3 days to hang in a line. Electricians mounted dual operators inside weatherproof housings, ran conduit through the masonry, installed a keypad on the exterior side, and tied the system into a backup battery. Landscapers replaced disturbed grass with fresh sod and planted dwarf hollies around the stone columns. Low-voltage lights washed the metalwork after sunset. By the time the final invoice arrived, the project total had climbed from the original $68,400 estimate to $79,860. Karen presented the increase as normal closeout. There had been a drainage adjustment, an electrical upgrade, and additional stonework around one column. The board approved the final payment during a short special meeting. Ethan downloaded the minutes the next morning. The utility warning was not mentioned. Neither was Olivia Grant's reference number. The minutes said only that access concerns raised by a resident had been reviewed and that the board remained satisfied with the completed design. That phrase bothered Derek. He emailed Karen privately, then copied the rest of the board when he did not receive an answer. Did we get written confirmation from the power company before approving final payment? Karen replied that the gate included multiple access methods and that management could provide credentials to authorized service personnel. Derek asked again, did they confirm that in writing? Karen answered a different question. She wrote that no agency had issued a stop work order, no permit had been revoked, and no inspector had ordered removal. Ethan was not on that email thread, but the exchange appeared later in records circulated before another meeting. When he saw it, he added 3 dates to a single page. May 6, utility confirms active easement and no gate approval on file. May 8, HOA instructs contractor to proceed. May 23, board approves final payment. No commentary was necessary. The chronology did the work. The gate went into service the following Monday. Residents received new remote controls. The management portal explained that delivery drivers, contractors, and visitors without remotes should use the call box or contact the management office. A separate note said utility personnel could request temporary access credentials from management. Karen called the launch a success. For the first week, nothing happened. Then another week passed. The motors opened smoothly. The lights came on each evening. The landscaping settled. Homeowners who had supported the project complimented the appearance. Someone posted a nighttime photograph in the community group and wrote that Cedar Ridge finally looked like the kind of neighborhood people paid to live in. Karen reacted with a heart. Ethan did not respond. He had no interest in proving a problem existed by hoping something went wrong. He simply kept the documents in one folder and went back to his routine. That was what made the next few weeks dangerous for the board. The absence of an immediate consequence began to look like evidence. At a June meeting, Karen told residents that concerns about utility access had been successfully addressed. She said the completed gate demonstrated that the board had handled the matter responsibly and asked homeowners to judge projects by results rather than speculation. Derek shifted in his seat but said nothing. After the meeting, he found Ethan near the exit. "Do you have the original utility email?" Ethan pulled it up on his phone. Derek read the first paragraph, then the second. "They never approved this. That's what it says." Derek looked toward the board table, where Karen was speaking with the property manager. "She told us access was handled." Ethan locked his phone. Maybe ask what handled means. Derek did not smile. He requested the full project file the next morning. Inside were invoices, contractor drawings, permit records, and email chains. There was no gate agreement with the utility. No approval letter, no access protocol accepted by the power company. There was only the warning Ethan had forwarded before the steel arrived. By then, the gate had been standing for 21 days without a problem. Karen treated those 21 days as proof she had been right. They were only the countdown before the first utility truck came back. And when it did, the issue would no longer be a survey line debated in meetings. It would be a locked barrier, a crew, and a record showing exactly when the board had been warned. The first utility truck returned on a Tuesday morning just after 9. It was not an emergency vehicle. No lights flashed. No neighborhood alarms sounded. The crew had a routine inspection order for equipment beyond the rear lane, the same kind of visit residents had ignored for years. The driver stopped at the new gate. He tried the call box. No answer. He waited, called the number listed on the access placard, and reached the management office. The receptionist said she needed to confirm authorization with the HOA before releasing a temporary code. The crew waited 12 minutes. Then 18. Ethan saw the truck from his kitchen window and walked outside, not to intervene but to understand what was happening. 2 workers were standing near the gate, one looking at a tablet while the other spoke on the phone. Access issue? Ethan asked from several yards away. The driver nodded, waiting on a code. Before Ethan could say more, Karen's SUV turned into the lane. She parked near the gate and approached quickly. "Who authorized this visit?" she asked. The crew leader identified himself and showed the work order. Karen glanced at it but did not take it. "We have security procedures now. Utility personnel can't just enter whenever they want. We're here on an inspection order, and the association will provide access once management verifies it." The crew leader looked at the closed gate, then at his phone. "We've already been waiting." Karen folded her arms, then management is handling it. A code finally arrived 27 minutes after the truck had stopped. The gate opened. The crew drove through, completed the inspection, and left less than an hour later. Nothing was cut, nothing was damaged. Karen treated that as vindication. She told Ethan the system had worked exactly as designed. The crew got in. After 27 minutes, they got in. Ethan did not argue. The utility's internal record did. The crew leader logged the delay as an access obstruction and noted that entry depended on third-party authorization not available at arrival. The report was routed to operations and property rights because the location was already associated with an easement inquiry. 3 business days later, Cedar Ridge's management company received a letter from the utility. The language was formal and restrained. The company confirmed its recorded easement, referenced the access delay, and instructed the association to maintain reliable access for utility personnel and equipment. It requested that the HOA contact the Property Rights Department to resolve the gate configuration. Karen called the letter administrative. At the next board meeting, she said the inspection had been completed successfully. No service had been interrupted, and no emergency had occurred. She described the 27-minute wait as a communication problem caused by a new system still being implemented. Derek asked why the utility called the gate an access obstruction. Karen said legal terminology often sounded worse than the underlying issue. Derek asked whether the utility had accepted the keypad arrangement. Karen said management was working on it. Ethan sat in the second row and listened. He did not need to speak. The board had moved from saying the utility had no problem to saying the utility's written problem was merely a misunderstanding. That was a measurable change. After the meeting, Karen sent residents an update saying the gate remained fully operational and that claims it might need to be removed were premature and misleading. She emphasized that the HOA was cooperating with all relevant parties. For a few days, that message seemed to calm people. Then Ethan received a copy of the crew note through the project correspondence shared with the board. Arrival: 9:07 a.m. access granted. 9:34 a.m. delay, 27 minutes. Reason: HOA authorization required. The numbers were too simple to reinterpret. The gate had opened. That was true. But the utility had also documented the gate as a barrier to access. That was true too. Karen had won the morning. She had not closed the issue. She had created the first operational record proving the exact problem Ethan had warned about before construction began. And now the power company was no longer asking whether the gate existed. It was asking how Cedar Ridge planned to make sure the next crew would not have to wait. That question mattered because routine inspections could wait. A damaged line, failed transformer, or urgent switching order would not care whether an HOA manager answered the phone. The second letter arrived by certified mail. This one was harder to dismiss. It referenced the recorded easement by book and page, identified the gate location from the utility's field report, and stated that access to company facilities could not be conditioned on locating an HOA representative at the time of entry. Cedar Ridge was instructed to propose a compliant access solution within 10 business days. Karen called an emergency board meeting. For the first time, the gate was not listed under beautification, security, or capital improvements. The agenda said, Utility Easement Access. Derek arrived with a calculator and the final invoice packet. The property manager had obtained a preliminary estimate from the original contractor. Relocating one masonry column, modifying the steel panel, moving conduit, resetting the operator, and restoring landscaping could cost between $18,000 and $26,000, depending on how much of the existing work could be reused. Karen stared at the estimate. Why are we paying anything? They built it. The contractor's project manager joined by video call. Karen asked why his company had installed a gate across a utility easement. He answered carefully. We installed the improvements shown on the owner-approved plan. You are the contractor. You were supposed to identify site restrictions. We performed utility locating before excavation. We were not retained to negotiate easement rights. Karen said the easement appeared on the plan. Correct, he replied. Then you saw it. We saw the recorded line. The design documents still showed the gate at that location, and we were given written authorization to proceed. Derek looked up. Written by whom? The contractor shared an email. May 8. Proceed with installation as scheduled. Karen said that email had been sent after the board was advised the gate could provide access through a keypad. Derek asked who had advised the board. Karen named the management company. The property manager immediately clarified that management had discussed possible access options, but had never represented that the utility accepted them. The room went quiet. A chain of responsibility that had sounded vague for months suddenly became visible. Karen blamed the contractor. The contractor pointed to the HOA approved plan. The plan showed the easement. The utility records showed no approval. And the email showed the HOA ordered construction to continue after receiving the warning. Ethan sat near the back with the same folder he had carried to earlier meetings. He did not make a speech. When homeowner comments opened, he placed copies of 4 documents on the table. The survey, Olivia's first written response, the May 8 proceed order, and the certified utility letter. Then he sat down. A woman across the aisle raised her hand. We paid almost $80,000 for this gate. Are you saying we might pay another $20,000 to move part of it? Karen replied that the estimate was preliminary. Another resident asked why the board had approved final payment after the utility raised the issue. Karen said there had been no formal removal demand at that time. Derek interrupted. They told us they had not approved the obstruction. Karen turned toward him. They did not tell us to stop construction. No, Derek said. Ethan did. The sentence landed harder than shouting would have. Karen recovered quickly. She proposed that the HOA reject the contractor's estimate and develop a less expensive access protocol instead. The gate already had a keypad, manual release, and backup power. A lockbox could hold emergency credentials. Management could maintain a 24-hour contact number. Several residents wanted the cheaper option. Derek wanted written utility approval before spending another dollar. The board voted to authorize Karen and management to negotiate an access protocol, but not to modify the gate yet. Karen called that a practical compromise. Ethan recognized it as something else. The board had been given a deadline to solve a physical obstruction. Karen's answer was to create more rules around the obstruction. The next morning, management emailed the proposed protocol to Olivia Grant. It required utility crews to call a dedicated number, identify the work order, receive a rotating code, and notify management after exiting. Olivia's response came that afternoon. It was 6 sentences long. The final sentence was the one Derek forwarded to every board member. The utility could not accept an access arrangement that depended on prior HOA authorization when exercising its existing easement rights. Karen had spent months arguing that the gate could open. The utility was now telling her that was not the same thing as having access. Karen's next proposal was more elaborate. She suggested a permanent utility code stored in the power company's dispatch system, a lockbox mounted inside the stone column, a list of approved utility contacts, and a requirement that crews call management before using the easement except during declared emergencies. On paper, it looked organized. To Karen, that was the point. If the problem could be turned into a procedure, then the gate itself did not have to be wrong. Olivia sent the proposal to operations. The response came back 2 days later. The utility would consider reasonable security measures that did not materially delay or condition access, but Cedar Ridge could not require advance permission for crews exercising recorded easement rights. The existing gate geometry also needed review for vehicle width, turning clearance, and manual operation during power loss. That introduced a problem Karen had barely discussed. The opening was wide enough for ordinary vehicles. A bucket truck towing equipment needed more. Marcus Reed, the field supervisor who had reviewed the earlier crew report, visited the site with a measuring wheel and a utility truck. He did not ask Karen to attend. He measured the clear opening, the approach angle, the distance between the masonry piers, and the space needed to turn without crossing landscaping. The numbers were not favorable. The gate could physically open. The access route still did not function the way the old open lane had. Karen responded by sending residents a long email. She wrote that the power company was applying new interpretations after construction, that the HOA had acted in good faith, and that Ethan's repeated complaints had unnecessarily escalated a manageable operational issue. She warned that premature modifications could waste association funds. Ethan read the message and did not reply. Instead, he forwarded Olivia's original May 6 email to Derek. No commentary. Derek forwarded it to the other directors. The date did the rest. At the next board meeting, Karen's allies were quieter. One director asked whether the utilities position had actually changed since May. The property manager said no. Another asked whether Ethan had contacted the utility before or after the board ordered installation to continue. Before, Derek opened the invoice file. If we relocate this now, we may be looking at $20,000. If we wait and the utility has to take emergency access, what happens to the gate? Karen answered immediately. They cannot simply destroy association property. Nobody responded. It was not because they agreed. It was because nobody in the room knew whether she was right. The board instructed management to ask the utility in writing what would happen if immediate access were required and the gate prevented entry. The answer arrived the next day. It avoided dramatic language. Crews would first use available access methods when feasible. If a structure, lock, gate, landscaping feature, or other obstruction prevented timely exercise of easement rights during necessary utility work, the company could take reasonable action required to obtain access, subject to the terms of the recorded easement and applicable law. Karen called the sentence hypothetical. Derek called it a warning. The board split 3-2 on whether to authorize redesign immediately. Karen used the tie-breaking authority available under the association's rules to postpone action pending another contractor estimate. That bought her time. It also placed her name beside another decision to delay. Soon residents were arguing about reserves and another assessment. Ethan refused to join the neighborhood argument. He kept mowing his yard. He kept the documents. When someone stopped him near the mailbox and asked whether he was trying to get Karen removed, he said no. I want the truck to fit through the easement. That was all. Karen's frustration grew because the simplest version of the story was the hardest one for her to control. She had built a gate across an access route. The company with recorded rights to that route wanted reliable access. Everything else was public relations. Then the Weather Service issued a severe storm watch for the county. Utility crews began staging equipment ahead of a fast-moving line of thunderstorms expected overnight. Cedar Ridge was not under evacuation orders. No catastrophe was predicted, but winds were expected to reach levels capable of bringing limbs onto distribution lines. Marcus reviewed the service map for his assigned area. One of the access points highlighted on his screen was Cedar Ridge. The gate Karen had spent weeks trying to turn into a procedure was about to be tested by something that did not care about procedure at all. The storm arrived after midnight and moved east before dawn. Cedar Ridge lost power for 6 minutes, then service returned. By sunrise, most residents assumed the worst had passed. At 7:42, the utilities monitoring system flagged abnormal readings on a line serving the rear section of the neighborhood. A large limb had come down beyond the houses, damaging hardware near a pole that could only be reached efficiently from the service lane behind Cedar Ridge. Marcus Reed's crew received the work order. They arrived at 8:16. 3 trucks pulled toward the rear access point. A bucket truck, a service vehicle, and a smaller equipment unit carrying replacement hardware. The gate was closed. Marcus stepped out, looked at the stone columns, then at the work order on his tablet. He tried the permanent code management had provided during the negotiations. Invalid code. One of his crew tried the call box. No answer. Marcus called the management number. Voicemail. He checked the notes attached to the location. Active recorded easement. Prior access delay. Unresolved gate configuration. Property rights correspondence on file. Then he called Olivia. Ethan saw the trucks from his window and recognized the situation immediately. He walked to the edge of his property but stayed back. Karen arrived 4 minutes later in a rain jacket, carrying a remote. "Why didn't you call me?" she demanded. Marcus looked at her. "We called the listed number. I mean before coming out. This is a utility work order." Karen pressed the remote. The gate began to open. It stopped halfway. The left panel shuddered. reversed several inches, and stopped again. The storm had knocked debris into one of the photosensors, and the motor controller was displaying a fault. Karen pressed the remote twice more. Nothing changed. "There is a manual release," she said. "Where?" "Inside the operator housing." The housing was on the far side of the gate. Marcus looked at the opening. It was wide enough for a person to pass through, not a bucket truck. Karen called the property manager and asked for the contractor's emergency number. Marcus did not interrupt her. He measured the remaining opening, checked the truck width, and compared the route with the utility map. The red easement line ran straight through the gate. One of the linemen asked whether they should use another access point. Marcus checked. The alternative route required approaching through private yards, crossing softer ground after heavy rain, and taking equipment around a drainage feature. It was slower and created risks that did not exist on the recorded access lane. He documented the conditions with photographs: gate closed, motor fault, utility equipment beyond barrier, work order active, easement map verified. Karen finished her call. "The contractor can have somebody here." "When?" "They're calling me back." Marcus looked at his watch. Karen's voice sharpened. "You are not authorized to damage HOA property. This gate cost nearly $80,000. Marcus did not react to the number. He called operations, then property rights, then his supervisor. Each call was brief. Ethan watched from a distance as the confrontation became almost entirely administrative. Karen kept speaking about ownership, repair costs, security rules, and liability. Marcus kept verifying one fact at a time. Was the easement active? Yes. Was this the identified access route? Yes. Was utility work necessary? Yes. Was the gate preventing the required vehicle from entering? Yes. Was a timely alternative available without creating additional operational problems? No. The contractor still had not called back. Rainwater dripped from the bottom edge of Karen's umbrella. Marcus printed nothing dramatic from a secret folder. He raised no voice. He simply opened the easement map across the hood of the service truck and traced the recorded corridor with one finger. "That is our access." Karen pointed at the gate. "And that is association property." Marcus nodded. "Right now it's also an obstruction." Karen stepped closer. "If you touch that gate, the HOA will hold your company responsible." Marcus looked toward his crew, then back at the map. He made one final call and read the work order number aloud. When he hung up, his supervisor's authorization was logged in the system. Marcus folded the map. "Document everything," he told the crew. Karen stared at him. One lineman retrieved protective equipment. Another opened the truck compartment where the cutting tools were stored. Ethan saw Karen finally understand what the letters, delays, and unanswered questions had been leading toward. Marcus pointed to the section that blocked the required clearance. "Open the route." This time, Karen had no procedure left between the utility and its easement. Work came first. The crew did not rush. That was the part Karen seemed least prepared for. Marcus assigned one worker to photograph the gate from both sides. Another recorded the operator fault and the position of the stalled panel. A third placed cones around the work area and confirmed that residents were clear of the lane. Only then did they bring out the tools. Karen stood beside the stone column with her phone raised. "I am recording this." Marcus nodded. "So are we." The gate had been designed to look permanent. Thick steel tubing framed each decorative panel. Motor arms connected the leaves to reinforced brackets anchored near the masonry. The left panel, the one frozen halfway open, occupied the clearance the bucket truck needed. The crew first tried the manual release from the accessible side. The mechanism would not disengage. They tried isolating power to the operator. The panel remained locked in place. Marcus looked once more at the truck, the opening, and the marked easement. Then he gave the order. A battery-powered cutoff, saw spun to life. Karen moved forward. "You cannot cut that." A crew member stepped between her and the work zone without touching her. "Ma'am, stay behind the cones. This is private property." Marcus answered without turning around. "We have documented the obstruction." The first cut went through the steel bracket connecting the motor arm to the gate. The sound carried across the wet yards. There was no cheering, only metal, sparks, and the consequence the letters had predicted. The bracket separated. 2 workers secured the panel. A second cut freed the reinforced connection that prevented the leaf from moving far enough to clear the truck. Together, they swung the panel back toward the masonry and tied it safely out of the travel path. The opening widened. Marcus measured it again, still tight. The decorative stop and a section of attached steel fencing reduced the turning clearance on the right side. The bucket truck could enter, but not without risking contact with the masonry. Marcus marked the interfering section. Karen stared at him. "You're cutting more? We need the required clearance. This is vandalism." Marcus finally looked directly at her. "This is access." The second tool came out. Workers removed the short steel section beside the gate and set it on the grass rather than throwing it aside. Bolts, brackets, and cut pieces were collected. Photographs were taken after each change. Nothing about the process looked angry. That made it worse for Karen. She had spent months treating the dispute as a contest of authority. Now the people exercising the greater authority were behaving as though there was no contest at all. The gate was simply in the way. 12 minutes after the first cut, Marcus waved the bucket truck forward. Its front tires crossed the threshold. The wide body passed between the columns. The rear equipment cleared the modified fence by inches. Then the truck rolled down the exact grassy lane Ethan had photographed before construction. Past the old utility marker. Past the transformer, toward the damaged line. Karen watched it disappear behind the houses. Ethan said nothing. He did not need to remind her about the survey. The truck had just driven along the line printed on it. The crew completed repairs and returned through Cedar Ridge that afternoon. The gate panel was still tied back. One motor arm hung disconnected. A clean cut exposed bright metal beneath the black powder coating. The stone columns remained standing, expensive and perfectly finished, framing a barrier that no longer functioned as designed. Karen photographed every cut. Marcus gave her the incident number and the utility contact for claims and property questions. She asked who would pay for the damage. Marcus did not answer a question outside his role. Property rights can discuss that with the association. The trucks left. Residents began walking toward the lane. Some looked shocked. Others looked at Ethan as if he had known exactly how the morning would end. He had not. He had only known the easement existed. Derek arrived 20 minutes later and stood in front of the open gate. How much did they cut? Karen answered before Ethan could. Enough. She was furious, but anger did not change the documents Marcus had created. Photographs, timestamps, work order, access attempts, motor fault, supervisor authorization, and the recorded easement. The gate was no longer just a beautiful project with a disputed legal issue. It was now physical evidence of what happened when that issue became operational. And before anyone could decide how to repair it, Cedar Ridge had to answer a more expensive question. Who was actually responsible for putting it there? By that evening, the argument had changed. Nobody was debating whether the utility could physically get through the gate. The left panel was strapped open. The motor arm had been cut free, and a section of ornamental fencing rested on blocks near the grass. The question was money. Karen emailed the board demanding that the HOA file a property damage claim against the utility. She attached photographs showing the cut bracket, disconnected operator, and removed fence section. Her message described the work as unnecessary destruction of association property. Derek replied with one sentence. Before we file anything, we need the entire project timeline. The board met 2 nights later. This time, Derek brought a binder. Page 1 was the original $68,400 project estimate. Page 2 was the final $79,860 cost. Then came Ethan's April question about the easement, the May 6 utility response, the May 8 instruction to proceed, the final payment approval, the 27-minute access delay, the first formal letter, the certified demand, the rejected access protocol, the warning explaining what could happen if an obstruction prevented necessary work, and finally, Marcus Reed's incident report from the morning the gate was cut open. The report was clinical. Crew arrived at 8:16. Permanent code failed. Management contact unavailable. Gate operator fault prevented full opening. Alternative access presented operational concerns. Recorded easement confirmed. Authorization obtained. Obstruction modified to permit vehicle entry. No sentence accused Karen of anything. That made the timeline harder to escape. Karen still tried. She argued that the utility should have waited for the contractor. She said nobody had told the board a failed motor could justify cutting steel. She said the HOA could not predict storm damage or equipment faults. Derek agreed with one part. No one had to predict the storm. He turned to the May 6 email. We only had to know they needed access. The original contractor joined the meeting again and provided a new estimate. Repairing the cut components and restoring the gate to its former configuration would cost about $9,700. That sounded better than relocation. For roughly 10 seconds. Then the contractor added that he would not recommend restoring the same configuration unless the utility approved it in writing. A civil consultant hired by the HOA had reviewed the easement after the incident. His recommendation was more expensive. Shift one masonry pier, widen the clear opening, relocate the operator, modify the adjacent fence, and create a geometry that allowed utility vehicles to enter without depending on the existing swing pattern. Estimated cost, $31,500 to $38,000. The room changed. Residents demanded to know why they should pay twice for one warning. Karen objected to the word intentional. Derek corrected the distinction. Building the gate was intentional. I'm not saying the outcome was. That was the problem. No one needed to prove Karen F. wanted the gate cut. They only needed to trace what the board knew when it chose to finish construction. A motion was made for an independent review of the project approvals and communications. Karen voted no. It passed 4-1. A second motion directed management to obtain a redesign that satisfied utility access requirements before any cosmetic repair was authorized. Karen voted no again. It passed. Then Derek made a third motion. He asked that Karen be removed as board president while the review was underway, with another director serving in the role temporarily. This vote was closer. Karen said the board was punishing her for defending association property. She reminded everyone that each major payment had been approved through formal votes. One director looked down at the binder, not with the full information. The motion passed 3-2. Karen remained a board member, but she was no longer president. There was no applause. Ethan did not smile. The result did not recover $1. It did not repair the steel. It did not move the columns. But for the first time since the project began, the person controlling the HOA's explanation of events was no longer the person who had made the key decisions. The independent review took 9 days. It found no conspiracy, no stolen money, and no secret deal with the contractor. The failure was more ordinary. The board had treated permits, construction approval, and easement consent as though they were interchangeable. Once the utility warning arrived, the project continued because stopping looked expensive, embarrassing, and unnecessary. That choice made everything afterward more expensive. The consultant's final recommendation eliminated the false finish completely. The HOA could not simply weld the bracket back together and pretend the morning with the utility trucks had never happened. The access route had to be redesigned. The gate Karen fought to preserve was now going to cost Cedar Ridge money twice. The redesign began 3 weeks later. This time, nobody treated the easement as a faint line beneath the drawing. The utility reviewed the access geometry before construction. The new plan widened the opening, shifted one masonry pier away from the travel path, relocated the gate operator, and left enough clearance for service vehicles to enter without waiting for an HOA representative to appear with a remote. The decorative fence stayed. Most of the landscaping stayed. The idea of controlled access stayed too. What disappeared was the assumption that HOA control came first. Crews dismantled the damaged gate section, cut electrical conduit, removed one stone pier piece by piece, and excavated the footing Karen had insisted was too expensive to reconsider months earlier. A new footing was poured several feet away. The steel panel was shortened and rehung. The operator was moved. A utility-approved emergency access arrangement was added. The final redesign and reconstruction cost Cedar Ridge $34,620, not including consulting and legal review fees. Combined with the original project, the neighborhood had spent well over $100,000 creating, damaging, and then correcting a gate that had begun as a $70,000 improvement. The number appeared in the next homeowner mailing without decoration. Derek, now serving as interim president, attached a plain summary of what had happened. The board had approved the project. An active utility easement crossed the site. The utility had not approved the original obstruction. The HOA received written notice before installation was complete. Construction continued. Access problems followed. Necessary utility work exposed the flaw. The gate was redesigned. No sentence blamed Ethan, no sentence blamed the storm, no sentence called the utility unreasonable. The timeline was finally allowed to exist without an argument wrapped around it. Karen remained a director, but the board changed its process. Projects touching easements or outside rights required review and written confirmation before contracts were signed. The reform was not dramatic. It was paperwork, which was fitting. Ethan returned to normal life. He skipped the board race, fixed his deck, trimmed the maples, and avoided neighborhood politics. One afternoon, while clearing leaves near the rear fence, he noticed a utility truck approaching the redesigned gate. The driver entered the approved access code. The gate opened fully. The truck rolled through without stopping. No call to management. No board president racing down the lane. No argument. The truck passed between the widened columns, followed the grassy strip behind the homes, and disappeared toward the transformer. The entire interaction took less than 30 seconds. Ethan watched it, then went back to the leaves. The old utility marker was visible again near the edge of the lane. During reconstruction, the crews had replaced the faded post with a brighter one. It was not attractive. It did not match the landscaping. Nobody would mistake it for part of the neighborhood beautification plan. But it had outlasted the original gate. So had the survey line. That line had been recorded long before Karen became president. long before Ethan bought his house, and long before anyone decided Cedar Ridge needed to look more exclusive. It carried no title, won no election, and made no speeches at board meetings. It simply described a right that already existed. Wanting a better entrance had never been the real mistake. The mistake was treating HOA authority as if it erased rights already granted elsewhere. A board vote did not erase an easement. A permit did not create utility consent. A keypad did not guarantee access, and an expensive structure did not become legally untouchable merely because removing it would be embarrassing. For months, Karen had acted as if the gate proved who controlled the lane. Then one morning, a stalled motor forced everyone to test that belief against the record. The record won. Cedar Ridge eventually looked almost exactly the way Karen had imagined. The stonework was clean, the steel was repaired. The landscaping grew back around the relocated column. At night, the same warm lights illuminated the entrance. The difference was easy to miss, unless you knew where to look. The gate now respected the strip of ground it had once tried to control. That was the quiet ending Ethan preferred. No victory sign stood beside the road. No plaque explained the dispute. New residents could drive through Cedar Ridge for years, without knowing why one column sat several feet farther from the lane than the original design had shown. But every time a utility truck entered without asking permission, the reason was still there. Power can be written into a title, printed on a board agenda, or built from stone and steel. Sometimes the stronger kind is only a thin line on an old survey. You ignore it because it looks small, until someone needs the road it protects.